is that my family will attempt to discredit everything I've said after my death. And I'm just beginning to regret that in 1994, 4 years before my brother decided he didn't want a gay member of his family. Not that I now consider myself to be gay, but at the time I had girlfriends, so I did then. That's not the point anyway. In my world, in a family, love should be unconditional. But there you go. I used to believe in fairy tales. In 1994, when my father supposedly died, something I'm still not sure I believe anymore. Because I'd like to know who died in 2000, if that was my father in 94. In 1994, I was doing my absolute damnedest to promote family harmony and keep the family together. God only knows why. My brother and I were joint executors, which might have worked out an awful lot better if it hadn't, in point of fact, turned out to be, not as per will, but as per fact, my brother, his wife, and I was outnumbered. Nonetheless, it went pretty fairly. One thing I would like to point out, I'm not sure if I have in a previous video, is that my father and mother both made wills in 1982. There were no subsequent wills. They were the one and only, the final. First and final. Those wills left 2/5 to my brother, 2/5 to me, and 1/5 to my older daughter. My younger daughter wasn't born at the time, which certainly explains why she was left out. But my brother's 3 children were. They were born in 1975 and 1978, respectively. The boys are twins. And yet in 1982 they were left out of my brother's will. I actually queried that with my parents and said, wouldn't this cause trouble? Why had they left only to my daughter and not to my brother's children? I was all for fairness in those days. I still am, actually. So, when it came to the joint executor bit, I consulted with my solicitor, and he told me there was something called a variation by agreement, which I then went on to suggest to my brother and older daughter, the other beneficiaries. This would allow for all 5 grandchildren to get £2,000 each, which doesn't sound a huge sum. It was worth considerably more in 1994. But it meant, of course, that my brother's portion was reduced, my portion was reduced, and my older daughter's portion was substantially reduced, from 1/5 to £2,000. But she agreed to it. If I had had the extra money, I would now have my own home. I would have bought my council flat and not worried about repairs and just sold it on. I would have become a part of the problem, whereby there is no longer much council housing, but a great deal of private housing, and the very people who need it the most can't get it. because landlords don't like DSS tenants. Still, at that time, that is what I would have done if I had kept the extra money which had been left. I would still be living in Southampton, in my own home. And I would by now have been there for 36 years. But hey, it was all about fairness. I'm not even sure that my niece and nephews know that they wouldn't have received a penny were it not for my intervention. Not that I want any medals for it, but I would like not to be blocked from their lives for expressing opinions, because I did my best for them. Well, for that, I'd have to talk about facts. What has occurred to me only today was that my initial suggestion, where my parents' belongings were concerned, was that my brother have my father's things and I have my mother's. It seemed fair to me, and I didn't want my father's things in truth. Fortunately for me, my brother didn't want all the letters and photographs that were boxed up. And I did, so I got those, which is the source of a lot of my evidence. My father did have 2 or 3 medals. It wasn't much more than that. But they weren't for bravery. They were not that kind of medal. They were long service medals, and medals just to say he'd been in a particular place at a particular time. That's all. There weren't any. No one should kill themselves. There were none for bravery. None to say that he had seen any action whatsoever. And he did not see any action whatsoever. He was never in Burma, for a start. Never. He wasn't there. My uncle was, my mother's brother. My father was not. He was an engineer. I don't know how he avoided danger completely, but I do know that he did. He was in the army for 6 years before World War II. And I remember him saying that when he heard World War II, his time was up. He was due for release and he wanted to be released. And he told me how his heart sank when it was announced that World War II had begun and he would have to stay in the army. It wasn't something he wanted to do. He hated the army, he said, although he used to talk about his times while in the army in really glowing terms, as if he was having the time of his life. And in fact, I do have letters talking about the servants that he had in India while in the army, and the glorious food. He used to describe food at great length and how wonderful it was. It sounded like a long party. There was only the one letter in which he mentioned that a mate of his had been wounded in a training exercise. There were other letters when he talked of going hunting animals. I mean, I honestly don't know what he did for the British Army. There's nothing to say anyway. Nothing. And my brother, who has his service records apparently, has this reference to my father having been elsewhere at some point, whatever elsewhere means. My father was no hero. ever. But what medals there were, my brother got. And I had asked my father about them, and he at least was honest enough to say, this was for long service, this was for being in this place at this time, etc. Not the kind of medals my uncle got. My uncle was in Burma. One place where that joint executive bit went very, very badly wrong for me was when my brother did decide we should have Peter Raw for auctioneer. Something my brother no longer remembers. But I can remember him running his finger down Yellow Pages, which was what we had before Google, until he found the name he wanted, and he said, yes, I think that's the one. This man was an auctioneer in Winchester. We lived in Southampton. Yes, it's only 10 miles away, but Southampton is a city, and there were plenty of auctioneers in Southampton, and I pointed that out to my brother. But he said, no, this is the one I want. I didn't even want to auction off the stuff in the first place. I wanted to keep it. Peter Raw, as I've said many a time, was a paedophile. I knew him to be a paedophile, and I had given his name to the police 6 years prior to my father's supposed death in 94, and I'm still going to say supposed, because I'm still wondering who the heck died in 2000. I couldn't see a way to get out of having Peter Raw for auctioneer. My brother was so insistent. I didn't want any major rows. I didn't want a big row. And I didn't want to tell him how I knew that Peter Raw was a paedophile. Didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to introduce that topic. So I was stuck there. Anyway, that's what happened. I got my mother's stuff, but I also got my father's letters and photographs. And I got stuck with the memory of having, for an auctioneer, a paedophile I'd turned over to the police.